Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grade Town Council Budget Workshop of March 26, 2024. I will begin with roll call. Councillor Gass?
Present.
Councillor McGuire?
Present.
Councillor Meany?
Present.
Councillor Height?
Here.
And I'm Councillor Chappell, and we are joined in chambers tonight by Town Manager Mike Foley, several members of staff, and also we have Dr. King from the school district here to go over this district's budget figures, our preliminary budget figures. We're starting with Dr. King's presentation? Yeah.
Sure. As I had indicated on the agenda, we have Dr. King here from MSAD 15, and he's going to go over some general updates, I think, for the school department for you, just since it's been a while, I think, and also some preliminary budget figures that they have and the work that they are doing to bring that in towards the end in next month. So
Okay.
I'll invite Superintendent King up.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Foley, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. Pre-COVID, I would go to the two town councils maybe once a year, sometimes twice a year, and sometimes it would be an official meeting or sometimes a committee meeting, so it's nice to get back to talking about my favorite subject, which is our schools. So I have a brief slide presentation, and then I can stick around for a Q&A period. So our school district, these are our school board members. We have 11, 6 from the town of Gray and 5 from the town of New Gloucester. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to brag a bit about our schools before I get to the budget piece. Just some data about the good things that are happening in our schools that I've accumulated the last few weeks. 85% of Russell School students scored at or above standards in the 2023 Developmental Reading Assessment. 80% of our Memorial School students scored at or above standard in the 2023 Developmental Reading Assessment. And these are all standardized test scores that kids across the state take. 88% of Dunn pre-K students met the state standard for identifying between 20 to 26 capital letters in the 2023 State Spring Assessment. 70% of middle school students are at or above the national average benchmarks for reading as measured by the Northwest Educational Assessment that they took in October. The NWEA, again, is every student in the state of Maine takes it. The score is reported to the Maine Department of Education. 85% of graduates of the class of 2023 enrolled in either technical college, community college, four-year college, or the U.S. military. 75% of MSAD 15 students are at or ahead of the national average for the grade level as measured by the Northwest Educational Assessment, this last October's statewide assessment. 43 students enrolled in PATHS, which is the Portland Arts and Technology High School career technical education. They spend half their day with us getting math, English, science, social studies, and then they go on to career tech ed. 43 of those students are receiving dual course credit for the high school and Maine community college system. So if they're taking a welding course and they're enrolled in the dual enrollment program, they can get credit both at SMCC Community College and our high school, so that if they do go on to any branch of the Maine community college system, they've already accumulated college credits. 48% of middle school and 48% of middle school students participate in at least one after-school athletic, performing arts, or civic activity. And then the presentation about our proposed budget for the upcoming school year. We had our introductory budget presentation last Wednesday, and they will have a second meeting tomorrow night, a workshop, budget workshop. A bit about who we serve. Last summer, we had 3 different sessions with the entire school board, and we workshopped together. We did a lot of it right here, and we did a self-study. Who are we as a school board? What are our values as a school board? What is our mission as a school board? And so they spent a lot of time on this philosophical self-reflective piece on who they are. So when they talk about the mission statement or the vision statement, these kinds of terminology, it is something that they actually formally have done a self-study on to research about who they are and what they believe, and probably began with 48 concepts and then funneled it down to the essence of what they believe. And determining who their constituency is. The constituency is school-age children of MSAD 15. The school board philosophy is to provide a high-quality education to all students in a fiscally responsible manner. And they're guided by their mission statement. And their mission statement is preparing students for their next step and instilling aspirations through rigorous and relevant educational experiences. And so the state funding is the essential programs and services model. Anyone who is on the school board or in the superintendent's office knows exactly what the EPS is. It began about 24 years ago. Someone in the commissioner's office created foundational funding. And the EPS looks at a variety of things on how they fund the schools. And we get our EPS form. It used to be a little yellow piece of paper on oak tag. And this tiny little piece of paper is extraordinarily powerful, because what it does is it tells you what the state contribution will be for your school district. And so the FY25 education funding is in the second year of the legislative 2-year cycle budget. So we have a legislative election coming up in November. When that legislature takes its seat in January, they will make a biennial budget, and so schools will now know for a 2-year period of roughly what their state funding is going to be. It wasn't always a 2-year period. You were chasing your tail every year, but now it's a 2-year funding formula through the EPS model. So this is probably, in a nutshell, the most important thing that everyone who cares about how schools are paid for or how their tax bill is determined for the school portion is the EPS, Essential Programs and Service Funding, is based on 3 things: the valuation of property in the school district, the student enrollment in the school district, and the disadvantaged student population. And so from a mathematical calculus, if you are a high valuation school district, you have a lot of expensive real estate and not many students, you will get very little money from the Maine Department of Education to support. If you are a rural district with not a lot of industry, not a lot of expensive real estate, and you have a lot of students, that's sort of the ideal funding. You'll get more funding than the average. And historically, MSAD 15, the valuation of the towns have been rather constant. The student enrollments have been constant, and the disadvantaged student population has been constant, with some fluctuations. But as you know, things have changed with property valuation. Like the rest of Cumberland County, property valuation has risen, in some cases far outpacing the state average. So over the last few years, valuations of people's homes, businesses, and other real estate has increased a bit. At the same time, our student enrollments have decreased a bit in the school district. So that's not a great favorable situation to be in terms of how much funding you'll receive from the Maine Department of Education. And then the disadvantaged student population, that's what used to be called the free and reduced lunch. And so how many students you had in the school district with free and reduced lunch, also you got a little extra funding for that. We don't have free and reduced lunch anymore. That's gone away. So the state has come up with a formula, and I don't think that formula is fully gelled, but they've come up with a formula to determine how to calculate disadvantaged student populations funding. So these are the three primary things in the essential programs and services that determine how much money we will receive as a school district. So how this plays out on a spreadsheet. So last year, the state contributed 47.3% of the funding for the school budgets, and 52.7% was raised at the local level. And then this year, 47.62% of the money to fund the school district will come from the state funding, and 52.38% of the funding will come from the municipalities that make up the school district. And as you see, this illustrates the rise in evaluation, increased by 8.9%. The 3-year average for that valuation in gray is 9.6%, and New Gloucester 7.7%. So the people who work the essential program and services funding model look at the valuation and they say, oh, Gray is becoming a wealthier town, or New Gloucester is becoming a wealthier town. So that number has worked against us in the last few years as the real estate prices increase. However, the positive side, we had an increase in 27 students. So we're going to get more money because we have 27 more students. Any questions on the EPS model?
Oh, no, I think
No.
we get it. Yep.
You can go to Orono and take an entire course on that one
Oh.
little. And so, so one of the things that facing us a little bit in terms of preparing a budget this year is the ESSER grant sunset, planning the American Rescue Plan elementary and secondary relief grant, what we are calling ESSER 3, has supported our school district to return to in-person instruction and continue providing services to all our students for the last 3 years. So for the last 3 years, the American Rescue Plan has given very generous funding to all school districts in the country to support remote instruction when children have had to stay home, and to make it possible for children to come back to school safely during those 3 years. And so that has been bolstering our budgets. The school district was supported by federal ESSER grant by $2,431,625 over a 3-year period. And so the money from these grants were designed specifically to ameliorate the schools in ways that are derived directly from the COVID crisis. And so we couldn't use the money to spend whatever we felt like. It had to be directly related to making it possible for kids to come to school or kids to have remote learning. And in some cases, that supported us two ways. They were mutual. They helped us in our budget, but they also met the letter of the law. And so how did we spend that COVID money? Air quality and ventilation, getting pure air, cleaner air in the schools, help prevent COVID. So HVAC, we did an HVAC project in the high school. Kids coming to school, we had only had 2 RNs for years, but because of COVID, we had 5 RNs. We made improvements to the health offices. We replaced older equipment. We had 2 general education social workers. People's lives were turned upside down. Families were in a bit of distress. Workplaces were in distress. So we felt we needed some general education social workers to help those people. Transportation, we had to put fewer and fewer kids on the bus. So that meant the bus drivers had overtime. So on and on and on and on. You can look at that list of, we used a lot of that money to make it possible for us to have our schools during COVID. And we also tried to spend it on things that had permanence. You know, there are certain items, for example, if you hire a teacher assistant and you pay them for 3 years, and then the money goes away and you no longer have a teacher assistant, and then you no longer have anything else. So we try to spend the money on things that would have real value. So now each school has an outdoor classroom, and they're very nice. And what that means is teachers will now have classes when they can take the kids outside and teach in the structure outside, meaning they get more fresh air and less building air. And that'll have permanence. This will be around for a long, long time. The ventilation system is warranted to last 25 years. We made other facilities improvements that help better heating, better air, better ventilation. That will have a long-lasting effect for us. We had to be able to train our teachers on how to teach remote. We had 10 kids in the classroom, 10 kids at home. So we purchased a lot of technology to help support kids at school. New playgrounds. Playgrounds were old, so now we built brand new playgrounds, and kids can get outside more, use those playgrounds to get more fresh air. So those are all the ways that we have spent that ESSER money. Well, the funding is leaving. We're at the last year of the grant. The grant isn't over. We have a small portion of that money that we have to finish up using. We can use a little bit of it for the start of next year. So what the administrators have had to do, and the school board is in the middle of working on, what are the things here that are going to go? Well, a vast majority of them are going to go. The ventilation system is done. The outdoor classrooms are done. But are there still things in this grant, and we all know how grant works, you get the money for 3 or 5 years, and then the grant goes away. Is your organization, your school, your town willing to keep some of it? So that's where we are right now, is coming to terms with what will not be funded locally, what will go away permanently. And so that's where we are right now. Our student enrollment projections have gone down. 1995 students, 1,995 students in 2015. This year, we're anticipating for the new school 1,820 students, which is a decline of about 30 students. And so this is the budget history. This has been a very cognizant and very frugal school department over the years. This is a 10-year history. 6.72% 0.91%, 2.17%, 3.94%, 4.8%. If you look at 2021-22, it was a 0.85% increase. And I think part of that is because we had some of those federal dollars that were bolstering our budget. And so 2023-24, the budget proposal that was brought to the school board last Wednesday night was 9.42%. And that is not what the budget will be presented for the community to vote on. We have been working on this number today. Every Tuesday I meet with the administrative team for 3 hours, and today we got a lot of work done looking at those items I just showed you and removing those items that we think we can live without. And the school board will continue that work tomorrow night in its budget process. Where are there areas that we can reduce? And also our director of operations is looking at some of our back office kinds of things. The leases we have with vendors, the leases we have with fuel companies, the leases that we have with whether it be insurance, transportation, or external services that come in. She is working on that, and that too will go to lowering that budget proposal. The local estimated tax impact will be determined when the school board finalizes the budget. So we expect, we have 2 more workshop days, and at that point, when the board is ready to present the budget, then we'll have a better idea of what the local estimated tax impact is. And so Wednesday was the first workshop that they did. They are doing work tomorrow night, and they are doing work on the 24th. And then the school board will sign the budget warrants on the 21st. And then on the 16th, we have the town budget and budget validation. So every voter in the towns that make up the district are eligible to attend this event. It happens every year. It's at the high school cafeteria. The town clerks that register the voters are there, and they check in the people from New Gloucester and Gray, and anyone that is a registered voter gets to vote. And what happens at that meeting, it's basically another form of public participation in democratic budget process. And so there are 18 warrant articles that deal with transportation, articles that deal with instruction, articles that deal with facilities. And so each one of those 18 articles will be explained to the public. Public can ask questions, and then they vote on whether or not to accept the article and the dollar amount attached to that article. At the end of the evening, if everything passes, then we have the budget that will be brought to the public for the June referendum. And again, voters get to vote on that June referendum. And then the votes on June 12th. I'm sorry, the votes on June 11. And then on June 12th, the school board welcomes its new members, and they vote on the ratification of the budget. And so that's my presentation. Question and answer. I'm here to answer questions, but I'm going to click this back so that people watching on TV can see what the dates are for the meetings. Tomorrow night, usually we use these facilities, but tomorrow night we're not able to, so tomorrow night's budget workshop will be at the high school if anyone's interested in attending. And then on the 24th, I believe we'll be back here.
Yeah, thank you for going over all that. That was certainly insightful. Just wondering, I know the 9% increase is preliminary at this point, but do you have a sense for approximately how much that will be decreasing if you?
So the goal is to get us back to our historical place. I can't speak too much to where it's going to be.
Sure.
I would like to get back to the 3.6, the 1.6, the 3.96, the 4.85, to get back to our historical roots of where that'll be. I think we'll have a better feeling tomorrow night. I would like to be below 6% for the first year coming off of our lucrative, generous federal grants that are no longer here. I think that would be a reasonable number for the school board to get to, would be below 6%. And so that's what we're looking at.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful, just a ballpark, because it certainly is.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have thoughts or questions? No? Go ahead, Dan.
Dr. King, the slide with the dates on it, for the budget vote and the signing of warrants, the district validation meeting being the sort of thing that really gives us our final number. Are your dates driven at all by the state, or how much control does the district and the school board have over your
We
schedule?
work backwards. So if this is the referendum date where the people go to vote, then we work backwards, because there is a certain amount of time that has to lapse between the validation meeting and the actual vote. And I have to get one of these in the mail that has all the budget invitation. I have to mail this to virtually every household and PO box in the town. So there are time constraints on that. And then the budget, the school board has to have time to do its workshops.
Yep.
And so these technically are not controlled by the state, but to meet all the guidelines for the June 12 referendum, the budget validation meeting, getting things to the printers, working with the 2 town clerks to print ballots.
That was sort of what was driving my question. Elections, have become more complicated and expensive, and the state, we only have a source for ballots. We can't, it's not like it's something that we can take to any old printer. And that time is pretty condensed. Between the 16th of May and the 11th of June is not a lot of time, and I just wondered if there was any.
Yeah, it's been a challenge the last 2 or 3 years with both New Gloucester and the town clerks here is just the window of time. And especially, I work with the printer to produce this, and they can't move as fast as they used to. They have the same labor problems that other people have. And so the short answer is no. We're not told what to do, but the reality is.
Yeah, if I may just add about the school budget vote. The one that's printed for the school budget vote just simply asks the question if you want to approve the budget as approved at the May 16th meeting.
Yep.
Oh,
So
we don't include the figure?
no, it's not
okay.
like the town one that has a warrant. So the
no,
clerk
yeah.
can get that printed at the same time she gets the municipal budget printed
That's
when
right.
we approve the warrants here.
Okay,
at the
yeah, I
town
knew it was a
council.
yes/no question, but I thought
Yeah.
the figure
Yeah.
was in there.
No, the figures aren't there. It just says, do you approve that occurred at the meeting on the 16th? And that information is supposed to be posted in the polling location.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of why the validation meeting is so important. That's where the public can come in and actually see the warrants and actually vote on the warrants, whether or not they approve the warrants. It gets posted on a website, gets posted in both town offices, and then it comes in this mail. But on June 12, it's an up or down vote for the budget.
Mhm. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming out, Dr. King. We certainly appreciate it.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for your
Yeah.
work.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you for coming. Okay, bear with me while I get my slides up here to talk about revenues. Okay, I think I have my slide up there on Teams, if we're able to bring that up on the screen. Perfect. There, so we had talked about revenues early on in the budget, just to kind of give you a heads up on them, but that was the next item we had to talk about on our agenda. And so I've provided some updated revenue figures that I handed out this evening. I had met with the council chair and vice chair on Friday, and they thought it was important that I tried to have any proposed changes in the budget to you guys now, so that there'd be a couple of weeks to digest them before our April 9th meeting, when we're able to work on that. So I worked until the afternoon to get all those figures up to date. And so if you want to turn to the second page, which is the revenue proposal that I provided a draft of in the original budget proposal, you can see we talked about the combined revenue groups. We had a lot more detailed budgetary lines, and we tried to combine them into groups, and we're going to work to have these budget groups reflected in our financial accounting software in the future, so that they can be accounted for with the breakdown of the different revenues below them. But this is a little bit more refined and gives you a little bit more breakdown of the different ones. So in the proposal that I initially made, we were trying to be very conservative in our budget estimates, but I wanted to ensure that we were being as accurate as possible. One of the things I discovered in years past, revenues weren't estimated along with actual figures. And so I want to make sure we estimate with as close to actual and forecast revenues out as much as possible. So you'll see in green some of the changes that I made, which are revenue forecasts that I feel like are stronger than what I had originally put together. And you'll see those on the council line. And when we get to items to be revisited, I'll go over all the proposed changes in the budget that we kind of talked about and that we recommend in those changes. So you'll see in the development fees, based on where we're trending in the fiscal year and the years ahead and projects that we know are in the pipeline, it looks like we'll be closer to a $200,000 figure for revenues in that area. So we updated that. And then solid waste and recycling fees, based on the work that Randy does, our solid waste and recycling manager, to generate revenues from the recycling that's collected at the transfer station. We're seeing those revenues trend a little bit higher, and so we're trying to better reflect those in the future years, and that's only a slight change from my original proposal. And then the biggest change of them all is the forecast for auto excise tax. Auto excise tax numbers continue to trend much higher than what was budgeted in years past. And so we've forecasted those out And so for both that figure and municipal revenue sharing, I forecasted out. And this isn't just me pretending what I think the numbers are going to be. On the last 2 pages of the packet that I gave you, I provided you actuals for both fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24, and for motor vehicle excise tax is the first one. And then I gave some estimates for the remaining months, March, April, May, and June, that we have in the fiscal year. And right now, we are 93% collected on motor vehicle excise tax for the current fiscal year. And as you'll see, we're trending to collect much higher. You'll also see that May and June are 2 of our biggest months for motor vehicle excise tax. And those trends tend to continue because people have to register their vehicles at the same time every year. We also felt more confident in these numbers based on some discussions I've had with other municipal managers you would think that motor vehicle excise tax in an economy like ours might start to decline when interest rates are at higher levels than they've ever been. The crazy economy that we've experienced post-COVID and things that have happened, nobody's experienced anything like this before. And so we're finding that the new vehicle registrations, typically when interest rates go up, auto excise tax begins to go down because people aren't borrowing money for new vehicles. And so we're finding that new vehicle registrations continue to be happening on a regular basis in the clerk's office. And one of the reasons that we're learning that those continue to happen is now that vehicle manufacturers and dealerships are caught up on inventory, they actually have inventory surplus. And you're starting to see the commercials where they're offering the discounted interest rates, the large rebates. Vehicle MSRPs are higher than ever, and that's what excise tax is based on. The push for EVs, those all have higher MSRPs, but they have tax credits associated with them. So people are getting a much more expensive vehicle at a lower rate. And so those are all trends that are causing motor vehicle excise tax to stay strong and to continue to stay strong into the future. So as you'll see, we're on pace to collect potentially $700,000 or more based on what was budgeted. Had this budget been in place last year for you guys, it might have been a little bit less of a challenging budget season, but now I'm able to actually use historical figures and provide those estimates. So now if you shift to the box that I created on the right-hand side, which is a forecast, I basically estimated potentially a 7% increase on the current fiscal year numbers that we're collecting. And as you'll see, in 2023, we collected 16% more than we budgeted. And in 2024, we collected 39% more than we budgeted. And so I'm estimating that the motor vehicle excise tax will continue to grow at a conservative rate of 7%. In addition to the factors that I talked about, the growth in the community is also a factor. Every new housing unit that gets built, we've had a lot of new housing get built in recent years, and we have more coming down the pike. That's 1 or 2 new vehicles that come in. And as incomes continue to rise, people are buying more expensive vehicles, and housing prices continue to rise. We're having more wealthier people essentially in the community that's purchasing more expensive vehicles. So those continue to trend. So we feel that the 7% increase is very conservative and will actually give us a larger number than what I put in the budget. So I put in a budget, I pushed the budget to $2,692,000, and based on the forecast that I generated, it'll generate more than that. But I wanted to be more strategic in those numbers to ensure they can have a positive impact on the budget this year and in the years ahead. And we'll continue to monitor that throughout the year and study how those impacts are coming in, and we're fairly confident they'll come in much better than we've anticipated. So then if you go to the next one, which is the municipal revenue sharing, you'll see in fiscal year 23, we had a budget figure of approximately $981,000, and we collected over $257,000 more, which we collected 126% more than the budget. So as the economy continues to perform well, every time you see in the news the state revenue forecasting committee is promoting or proposing state budget surpluses, that's positive news for municipalities. And so because we get 5% of state sales and income tax, we get those revenue numbers increase. So you'll see this year, the revenue numbers are increasing more than what we forecasted, but they're not increasing at the same rate. And so you continue to see the governor and the state announce higher revenue forecasts in the current fiscal year and essentially supplemental state budgets to balance the budget. So we're on track to collect about 111% more than what we budgeted for. And so based on the estimates from the treasurer's office for this year and based on some of the trends that we're having, we've estimated essentially 5% growth in those, which is less. It's half of what the estimated forecast is this year, so I consider it to be a conservative figure. And so in talking with municipal managers, a lot of municipal managers are making pushes in these revenue figures to help have positive impacts on the budget. And so I feel like this is a fairly conservative estimate that, and again, with the estimates that I came up, it does show an overcollection. And so we have some room based on my forecast. So those are two revenue figures that I pushed, but this is not just based on my guess. These are thorough forecasts that I feel like can help us make positive decisions for the future. So then the other areas in the revenues that I want to talk about is interest, general fund interest. We developed a better investment strategy that we've already had. No monies were budgeted for general fund interest in last year, and we've collected a significant amount this year with extremely low interest rates that we had. We've gotten our banking partner to upgrade our base interest rates for all of our accounts to 2.75%. And so at an average of 2.75%, we're estimated to generate about $300,000 in revenues based on the cash we have on hand. And so that's a conservative figure because I've also begun using monies that we manage in cash flow, using monies to invest in certificate of deposits. And we just recently secured some certificate of deposits over 5% interest in the current fiscal year that we have that's going to take us into next fiscal year. And then we'll continue to manage our cash flow and either do 6-month or 3-month certificate of deposits. So we're technically on pace to probably generate more in interest revenue, but that's also an area we want to be conservative in because the certainty we have is that our bank's offering us 2.75%. So I developed estimates based on that, which gave us the $300,000 revenue figure. And that's something that all municipalities have been experiencing. I'm disappointed that before my time here, the base interest rate for our accounts was 0.85%, and our banking partner didn't automatically raise them like a lot of our consumer banks do. Consumer banks will automatically raise your interest rates as interest rates rise. And unfortunately, that didn't happen because we didn't ask for it. So we've asked for it, and we have much higher interest rates, and we have other investments that were actually available. You know, we saw record interest rate highs in the last couple of years, so we could have generated more of the town's money. But we're pushing our banking partner to hopefully provide us some other services in exchange for that lack of interest, but we'll continue to push them. The other thing that we're going to consider once I get settled and get some things in order, potentially to ensure that our banking partner is competitive. We hope they are, but we'll do a banking RFP, which a lot of my colleagues in the municipal management world have suggested that that's something we should do. I don't think that's been done for a while here. And that will just ensure if they are the most competitive, we can verify that and say that they are. If not, we could potentially have a new banking partner in the future. But we'll continue to update the council on that. We did make changes to the Blueberry Festival in the revenue figures, and we talked about this in the expense lines as well. We know the Blueberry Festival has some revenues, and they really haven't been properly accounted for. And so kind of like we did with recreation, we're trying to just create some budget lines that things can flow through, that we can have more accurate figures in the future. So these are best guesses of potential revenue and potential expenses that we had earlier in the budget, that if they're less or if they're more, there won't be a huge budgetary impact, and that way we can have a proper line to account for monies that come in, and then to account for expenses associated with the Blueberry Festival, such as employee time, the festival is supported by our facilities department, our recreation department, and our public safety staff. So we want to make sure when they're supporting that festival, we account for that. So just the property taxpayer knows what our contribution is to the success of that festival. I have heard from the organizers of that festival recently that want to get a better understanding of how we're accounting for this, and with myself and our finance director, so we'll be meeting with them to explain to them that these are just best guesses. We're not going to hold you to raising exactly $20,000. We just want to make sure we have a budget line that those numbers can flow in and out of. And it's kind of, they do a lot of work in essentially in one fiscal year, and the festival happens in another fiscal year because the festival's in August. So this way will hopefully allow us to better account for that. And then just a note about general assistance. Those are based on budgeted estimates for services, and I think I kind of talked about that. Budgeted expenses of rent, food, and its current formula is 70% of those expenses. There is a bill pending in the legislature to potentially raise that to 90%. Not a huge budgetary impact for us, but if it is, it will be an impact. If that change is adopted between now and our meeting on the 9th, then we'll see if we can incorporate that into the budget. If not, then it'll be a bonus in the budget in the future. So the business equipment tax exemption, Betty, known as Betty, and homestead exemption, in some of the previous revenue estimate figures that I was looking at for here in the town and what you kind of were used to, they accounted for those revenues in the revenue figures, but they actually didn't account for it in the property tax rate calculation. So one of the errors in the property tax rate calculation formula was that we were counting those revenues in the property tax rate calculation, and there's no wrong or right way to calculate them, but if we want to compare apples to apples, it's best to not have those figures included in our revenue figures, and they're included in the tax commitment. And it's essentially a reimbursement, so it's not like new revenues that we're getting or things of that nature. So I actually like the method that has been done here, where it's just accounted for in the property tax commitment that the assessor does and not counted as an actual revenue. We did it a different way in Westbrook. There's no wrong or right way. It's just if you want to be able to compare apples to apples, you have to do it in that manner. So I've removed those from our revenue estimate figures, and though they were previously included. And so they were included in the estimate figures, but they weren't actually included in the property tax rate calculation for the town. And then we talked extensively about recreation, how we've brought recreation into the general fund budget to be discussed, and for transparency and to show that the town has a supplemental factor in the budget with all the other departments that support it. And so this is our best guess on revenue. We feel it's a very conservative guess on revenue, so we're hoping we exceed that a little bit, but that's new in the budget. And then the other, so we have, this is on our agenda to talk about today, which is transfers, but it's kind of in the same discussion under revenues. So as we talked about transferring funds from TIFs to support economic development, that continues to be in there. And back in fiscal year 24, the town used $1,937,000 from fund balance to essentially help offset some other expenses or some transfers to some funds, and about 1.5 million of it was used to actually offset the tax rate, which is allowed under the town's fiscal policy and the charter. And so in basically the adjustments that I've made in both revenues and expenses that we'll talk about in more detail, originally we had requested to step down that number from 1.5 or from 1.9 million to 1.4 million as a total, with 1.5 originally being used to help balance the budget. And I proposed to step that down even more to $1 million. And I've reflected that in the fund balance reconciliation that I talked about at the beginning of my budget process, or beginning of my budget presentation. And that fund balance reconciliation is attached in your folder. And so if you just think about, if you go through at the bottom where it says the proposed fiscal year 25 commitment, this was based on our original budget, and that was a higher figure. But we should have at least $1,559,000 in fund balance. We currently have, according to our fiscal year 22 audit, we have $6,274,000, which is 100% of what the policy says we should have. So we have essentially in excess of about 75% than what we need to have by the policy. So if you look in fiscal year 23 further down, where it shows that where I reconcile the amounts, there was a fiscal year 23 transfer of $835,000 to essentially balance the budget. If you look back at my estimates on revenue sharing and both excise tax, you'll see that we overcollected those. So between overcollection of those funds and between under expenditure of revenue, of expenses, which we feel like happened in fiscal year 23, though we don't have a fiscal year 23 audit to speak to, we're fairly confident that this figure will be substantially less than what was recorded in the budget. So then in fiscal year 24, they planned a $1.5 million usage to balance the budget, $417,000 for the land acquisition fund, and $20,000 for the credit reserve fund. I still don't 100% understand what that fund is, but I'll get to the bottom of those. So that, again, if you look at the excise tax and revenue sharing figures for fiscal year 24, also with we're going to under expend expenditures with vacant positions we've had and things of that nature. We feel that we won't have to use that, but that's what the figure we have that's been adopted, and so we wanted to reflect that. So if all that shakes out as actually budgeted and not based on the kind of the positive news that I shared, with the 1 million transfer, we'll have $2,502,000, which is still almost 40% of what the policy says we should have. So we'll have an excess of about 15%. Then when we do end up having a fiscal year 23 audit, we can reconcile this further and have a better confidence factor in what those figures are in the future. But based on the estimates we have now, we feel like those are possible. I do know that there's potentially concern about using fund balance at all to balance the budget. I didn't do that last year. I wasn't here to make that adoption, and that's what happened. And I don't think it's a wise move to just cut that out completely. I think really it should be strategically stepped down so there's not a big fiscal cliff for the town. If the town council doesn't want to include anything for fund balance, we can take that out, but it'll ultimately result in a tax rate increase, a substantial tax rate increase. And as you'll see when we get to the bottom of this discussion today, I've forecasted hopefully a tax rate decrease based on some of the changes that we've made. And so that is kind of the revenue discussion in a nutshell. It's fairly lengthy and complicated, but I know it's kind of the second time you've heard it, other than some of the figures that I talked about. So I'm happy to take any questions as we talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I just want to say on the excise tax, the auto excise tax, I mean, that has been our experience dating back to, at least recent years, that even in 2020, when, the world was upended, our auto excise taxes were running above projections. So I feel like you're probably in a safe zone there.
Awesome, thank you. And I think that's what's resulted in some of the hefty fund balances that you have as well.
Right.
Go ahead, yeah, no,
So I agree that we should maintain removing some money from the fund balance just because it's just so excessively high and we've been over collecting for so long, and we should refrain from doing that in the future. I guess I'm just thinking ahead. Once we get the fund balance down to our 25 to 30% commitment that we're required to keep how will we continue to support the things that we're funding with the fund balance now? I guess, what is the long-term plan for that?
Yeah, so ultimately, it'd be my goal in the next budget or two to step that down to 0.
Right.
And then depending on what we're making for contributions and what we have, I think the best strategy would be to hopefully fund capital improvements with excess fund balance. That way, we can plan to budget or spend, and as I talked about when we talked about CIP, that can be one of the funding strategies with CIP, is use of fund balance, grants, state funds, things of that nature, so I can break down a more detailed funding strategy for you in the future for CIP. That's what a lot of municipalities use fund balance for, is to fund CIP, because they're one-time expenses. You typically, and you're not creating fiscal cliffs for yourself for doing those over and over again. And so naturally, if we have positive performing budgets, the use of fund balance number naturally will be less. So if the budget that I've estimated, which I feel like conservative, it's conservative, but we're pushing the revenues a bit. If we, in the fiscal year 25 budget, if we have positive performance both in revenues and also positive performance in expenditures, we'll essentially use less than that. So a lot of times you can plan to use it, but you don't use it. And that makes it easier for us to step it down faster in the future. So I hope that without creating ourselves a fiscal cliff, that next year I'll be able to drop it down to 500,000, and then the year after that eliminate it completely. But again, it's hard to predict, economies and things that are happening in the future. There's a presidential election in November that can have effects on the economy and things of that nature. So I think we're good in a conservative spot right now. The other thing that we can use fund balance for in the future, under items revisited, I want to talk about debt. We could potentially use it to pay off some debt that we have that may or may not should have been incurred in recent years. And so we can, when we have a more finite number on the fund balance, I'm actually going to recommend that we pay off the 5-year bond that we did for the septic project here at Pennell, because that is a bond that we have the ability to pay off early. Not all bonds do you have the ability to pay off early. And that in the budget is a $230,000 annual expense that essentially could be eliminated if we pay that off.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what that means for future budgets, and that's helpful. Thank you. Dan, you said you had some questions.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I want to say some things, and I'd like you to correct me if I make any mistakes.
Okay, I'll let you finish.
No, that's all right. First of all, I think this is a vast improvement over where we've been in the past in a short period of time, and I appreciate that. I'm looking at numbers here that I've never seen before in my 7 years on the council. So the positive of that is, the sharpening our pencils and getting a grip on what our finances are and being able to predict with confidence what we're going to do. I also appreciate the fact that the goal of obviously not collecting more than we need. The charter is pretty clear about a minimum and a maximum that we're supposed to have for the fund balance, the undesignated fund balance. When you talked earlier about the fact that we've collected 93% of our excise tax money already, I think we're more accustomed to these numbers, but to translate that, we're 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, but we've almost collected 100% of what we thought we did. So that in the next 3 months, obviously, we're gonna collect a lot more than, there's the opportunity to collect a lot more than we thought we would. And that's why that can sound a little confusing, I think, to people. And I think also the goal, the way you step through how you're calculating the excise tax is something that we've talked about and sort of wish to get to a point where we were doing. So that's also a plus. The banking RFP, the fact that we have someone now in the manager's chair that's sort of watching the fort and paying attention to those things We've RFP'd other things like legal. We tried RFP auditing. I know we're still working on that. So yeah, I think, banking should obviously be part of that lineup. The capital improvements piece, we've used the undesignated fund balance for capital improvement projects in the past, or to fund the overall program. And then just the last thing, try as you might to get the revenue numbers right, there are still projections, and things change, and sometimes you collect more, sometimes you collect less. But again, just a reminder to anybody that once you vote on the budget, these numbers get set in stone, and anything that's collected in addition to what we budgeted, that's what that undesignated fund balance is for. That money goes in there and is collected. It's not money that's available for us or the town to spend until the voters have an opportunity in the next budget cycle to vote on that. So I appreciate the detail and all the additional information. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Certainly. Go ahead, Matthew.
No, just, pardon me. I mean, and this is not a substantive comment, I guess, but an observation or whatever. And I can appreciate the use of the council column to sort of account for the differences from earlier projections, but it almost looks like, the council's getting credit for all this new revenue that we didn't have anything to do with, as far as, at least I didn't have anything to do with. I mean, it was staff that, so I guess that's my observation. Will this be, will this be reflected in the final thing? It looked like, oh, look, the council found $300,000 worth of interest there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I debated that. It's been kind of like an unwritten rule with municipal managers that once we've given the budget to you, that any changes after that really are yours.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be things, and I don't mind there being credit that you people thinking that you guys found it. There's always going to be things between the day I present the budget and between the day we adopt the budget of things that are changing. Like
Yeah.
in the changes I'll talk to you about on items revisited, we received updated figures on workers' comp. We've received updated figures on general liability insurance. We've received some updated figures on some softwares. We've received, so those things happen. That's one of the hindrances to starting the budget process as early, but by charter, we're required to have it presented to you 90 days before the deadline. So there may or may not be even some tweaks between now and April 9th that I'll try to have to you in advance of April 9th. So when you vote on the budget warrants on April 9th, those are reflected in there. But I think we're closer to where the figures should be.
So that's just a convention, that council column.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
not necessarily reflecting anything we did, it's just a convention.
it's what you approved at the end.
Yeah.
Right, it's traditionally how it's presented, but I see what you're saying,
Yeah.
Matthew.
If you want to give me the credit, then that's fine. Or if you want to wait until in the future, I can leave the council column blank and just make all those adjustments in the town manager column. But I think it
Yeah.
goes with the practice of once I present it to you, it's your
Yeah.
document.
Whatever we call it, I think it's helpful to see that, you presented one thing, and then
Yeah.
these are the things that have changed since.
And it'll probably all look different when we use ClearGov software as well, so.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's the important piece, is just keeping track of the changes.
Yeah.
Right, oh, yeah. And if that's a convention, I don't think we need to change that. But, I think of that council column as saying, well, the council pushed back on the manager's budget and wanted, $100,000 cut here or whatever. That's, in my mind, that's what that council column is sort of for, but I'm fine with it as it is.
Okay, do we want to move on to this memo you created? With the-
Yeah, so if quickly, I'll just mention county tax.
Oh, yeah.
It's on the tax rate sheet, so you can see it. I don't have a lot of details about the county budget. It's kind of explanatory, self-explanatory, the services they provide, separate from the county sheriff's contract that we have. They provide jail services, they provide registry of deeds, district attorney's office, the
Emergency
courts,
management.
emergency management, emergency communications, which we have a contract for too, in public safety. So they have an assessment that they provide based on the valuation of the town. So the valuation has grown slightly. Anything in TIF is sheltered from that. So the valuation's grown slightly, but they have a substantial increase percentage-wise in their budget in general. And then we're also in year 2 of 5 of their change to fiscal year budget, and they provided municipalities essentially an interest-free loan to make 5 equal payments.
Yeah.
So for Gray, that's approximately $75,000. So at the end of the 5 years, the hope is that $75,000 goes away, but I think they'll find a way to spend it, so we don't see an increase as I've seen historically. So that's the county budget, if anyone had any questions on that. Otherwise, so I prepared a memo for you guys, which has some proposed changes in the budget. And so this is something that I've kind of talked about, and given the positive impacts and revenues, we have under administration to potentially also add to support our finance staff a payroll and accounts payable manager position that we propose to be effective on January 1st of 2025. So as you know, in the proposed budget, we propose to add an accountant position. I think one of the challenges that I've observed in the town is the town's been growing, finances have been growing, and we have not invested in our financial support staff to ensure that our fiscal house is in order. So I think the addition of the accountant position and the addition of a payroll and accounts payable manager position will really give us the right-sized finance department to manage the fiscal house here at the town of Gray into the years ahead. We figured, since we're going through reorganization with finances, we brought on some accounting support to help us sort out our financials at the moment. And we'll be bringing on an accountant position potentially at the beginning of the fiscal year, maybe earlier using some existing funds that we have in the budget, but we may wait until the fiscal year starts just to ensure that the budget's approved. And then we feel like then we can have the capacity to hopefully bring on this position in January. Right now, accounts payable is supported by a part-time person that we hired using existing budgeting funds that was brought on before I started, and payroll is handled by our HR director. What I envision to happen in the future is that HR will be a check and balance of payroll, and our finance director or accountant will be a check and balance of accounts payable, probably the accountant, and then the finance director and me and the council's finance committee will be a check and balance of the whole thing. So it gives us multi-layers of checks and balances to hopefully recognize issues or errors much earlier in the financial process. And so I think that will be helpful for us in the future, and I think that support will be appreciated for all departments.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So just what is the finance department going to look like going forward after this year? I know you were adding an accountant in your
Yep.
original
So we'll have 3 positions as of January 1st. It was a position that I had contemplated doing in the next fiscal year, but given the positive results, I thought that it might be hopeful to add that. We'll have a finance director, an accountant position who will be second in command, and then a payroll/accounts payable manager.
Okay.
And where we do payroll, we have biweekly payroll, so we do payroll every other week. So therefore, on the opposite weeks, they'll still be doing some payroll work on each week and still be doing some accounts payable work, but they'll be able to produce every other week a payroll and accounts payable. And then the accountant specifically will help us with reconciliation of statements and accounts and work with our department heads to ensure that we're creating documentation. We are swimming in paper here at the town, so we'd like to go away from paper and have invoices electronic, and so we're going to be pushing out to department heads sooner rather than later to start scanning in documents. So we'll want somebody to keep documents all organized, And then that will allow the finance director to be a more check and balance of everything that's happening and to work on big picture items like the budget, like the audit, and work with bonding and financing and banking and all those different things that really right now with a one-person finance show, we're just paying the bills and making sure people get paid. And I've recognized that that's why things have kind of been neglected.
Yeah, I think that's a smart move. We've certainly had that feedback also from, before you even got here, from HR and finance also. So I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other, do we want to go through them one at a time?
Sure, yeah.
Any
so
other questions?
we probably should have questions as we go, because otherwise we might forget.
Because there are a lot of,
Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah.
any other questions on the payroll or accounts payable manager? Again, this is budgeted for $25,000. It'll be a $50,000 position in total, and will reflect. We over budgeted a little bit in insurance estimates and things of that nature, so we won't make any changes to those as part of this.
Okay, I was wondering
where
about
we-
benefits.
Where we do
Okay.
have some vacant positions and things of that nature, I think we'll be able to handle that. But yeah, so that position will start January 1st of 2025.
Okay.
Any other questions on that position?
I don't think so.
Then the next one is part-time personnel. We just moved resiliency fellow from solid waste and recycling. We talked about the confusion with that, so we moved that to part-time personnel under the administration. I also, given that all we had left in the council boards and committees budget was the council stipends, we moved those under to the administration budget. And when the public votes on those figures, they need to be voted on separately, so we just won't include those figures in the total administration total on the budget warrants. And so we've learned a lot of municipalities kind of handle it that way. You know, in Westbrook, we handled it similar, and Justine and I went to a budgeting class recently where we heard from a seasoned manager who recommended that that's where they be placed, the stipends, and we'll create a new budget line that says council stipends there. I didn't ask for questions on the resiliency fellow.
That's
but
okay.
That was pretty explanatory.
Yeah, we talked about it last time. That's fine.
Any questions on the move for the council?
No.
One of the things we're doing, and this is reflected as, and you'll see this later, we're trying to remove budgets that kind of have overlap and also try to refine it into more budgets so that makes it easier for us to do accounting as well in the future. So we talked about community services at length. So we reconcile the ones that we actually received requests from and that were ongoing support of the town, and we moved those into specific departments that they kind of support. And so under member dues for the administration, we moved out of community services the snowmobile club, which I want to talk about a little bit more in the future, RTP, and the historical society. The snowmobile club, just to give a tidbit, is typically what I've seen happen in municipalities that have snowmobile clubs is they provide the snowmobile club with the fees collected for snowmobile registrations. Since I'm unsure exactly what we're collecting for snowmobile registrations, we have a conservative estimate. In the future, what I might like to do is take it out of the budget and then just develop a policy that the council will adopt, or an ordinance or something that says we will automatically provide them with fees from snowmobile registrations. So it will ebb and the revenue to them will ebb and flow based on snowmobile registrations. And then that just takes it out of the budget completely, both from a revenue and an expense side, since it's such a small number. That was the policy we had in Westbrook. Surprisingly, we had a snowmobile club in Westbrook, and I've learned that's what Wyndham does, and a few other places that have snowmobile clubs.
One of the things that was formerly on that community services budget was lake water quality that was going to the Lakes Associations. Has that moved to a different department?
We'll get to that.
Oh, sorry, I just didn't see it.
No, that's all right. So those three were the ones that I thought fit under administration, because they didn't fit
Okay, yeah,
Really-
I'll hold my question then.
in any other department.
Keep going then.
And then advertising, I included the advertising for resiliency in the administration advertising.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if resiliency needs to advertise more than the $1,000 we had, we're going to do it because it's important. They're doing critical work. We'll find a way to figure it out in the budget if we need. So I don't want the committee to feel like they don't have budget funds and that they're tied to only that amount. If they need advertising expenses, we'll find ways to fund those in the budget. And as we do more resiliency work, if we need to increase that budget in the years ahead, we'll increase that and we'll have more accurate data to show you guys in future budgets for that. Any questions about that?
No, I just say that if we get this grant we're applying for this week, then we should be have funds that would help support the advertising we need to do for that work.
Got it. For that lake specific work. Yeah, perfect. So we won't even, might need to tap that this year.
Might not, we'll
Yeah.
see, yeah.
The next one is under audit. I've added, we had originally increased that substantially to $30,000, and based on some advice I'm receiving from financial advisors, that we need to increase that by $70,000 to help us get through the changes and the reconciliation of previous audits and the fiscal year 23 finances, given the state that they're in. We don't think that this will be an ongoing expense. Once we get the financial statements of the town in order that we're all confident about, then I think that number will be substantially less in the future. And I had kind of given you a preview that might be
Yeah.
coming at our last meeting.
You had a
So
question?
this is actually for the 2024 audit too, which will come due next year.
It's not necessarily for the 2024 audit because we're gonna have to make expenses in the 2025 fiscal year. Likely,
Right.
we won't have it. Those funds will support that.
Yeah, that's what
Got
so
it.
we really have two audits though.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, so,
Thank you.
yeah. And then, general insurance, we got a revision on our annual costs, and which was we had budgeted slightly higher, so it's a reduction in expenses of $15,515. And then, any questions on that?
No?
And then Blueberry Festival, we talked about, we eliminated the community services budget by moving all those different things, so we moved that to administration. So we'll keep that under administration. And again, that's just an estimate to figure out where we can put funds. Under office equipment, I added $5,000 for the new positions that we're having. We envision putting the finance positions in the conference room that's in between the finance director and the town manager. That way it'll be close access for us for financial related matters. And that conference room doesn't get a lot of usage. And so as we grow our staff, between the placement of the finance positions and the other positions, we feel like we might need some new office furniture, office equipment, but we'll try to do that using existing resources we have and limited investment. Any questions on that?
No?
Under HR, we show workers' comp reduction, revised annual cost. We had budgeted that too high, so that's $38,000 reduction, almost $39,000 reduction in workers' comp, revised annual costs. And then, any questions on that one?
Nope.
That was good news.
Yeah.
It's higher than the current year, but less than what we had budgeted, so.
Just a quick one. Is it, some of these are the amounts themselves and some of these are adjustments to other amounts, correct? Like the workers' comp number?
These are all adjustments.
Right,
Yeah, okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to be clear about
Yeah,
that. Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
And then under community development, under professional services, we increased $13,500, which was the move from community services to lake water quality. And that was where we had some other some other water testing and water-related things, so I thought that was the best place to put that. So all those, and we had received requests from all those lake organizations, so we wanted to
Yeah,
make sure those stay in
definitely.
there.
Okay.
And then community, I don't know,
Communications IT?
communications IT, somehow the number is empty. Under
Oh.
software, I had an increase. I'll include that in revisions in the future, but we had an increase in one of our softwares, and it must have got deleted in my transfer, so I apologize for that. On site host fees, that's in communications IT as well, and that was an increase, a revised annual cost. And that's specifically for our software for the agenda management system, Granicus, I think it's pronounced.
Granicus, yeah.
Yeah. And
So
that-
this is another, so just looking at the original proposal, the original proposal was up 1,800 over last year. So is this 2,850 on top of that 1,800, or is?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. They provided us a revised estimate. I'm not sure
Okay.
if those were accurately reflected in years past either.
Okay.
Under recreation, we moved from community services, the Southern Maine Agency on Aging, to recreation. They do a lot of work with the Southern Maine Agency on Aging, so we thought that that was best fit in there. We put that under member dues. And then the same for member dues for public safety, we moved the community services, Maine healthcare at home, and through these doors, which were items that we had received requests for, and they're public safety related, so we put those there.
Did we receive any requests from the hospice agencies last year?
We
Do you know?
didn't.
We didn't?
No.
Okay.
So I know we're at 6:54.
Yeah.
And the next discussion, do we want, I know we hadn't planned, I'd hoped to get everything in time, but we're close. The next discussion is more complicated to talk about bond reallocation, so we're gonna get into discussion about that. So do we want to keep plowing through, and maybe start the council meeting late, or, we don't have a lengthy council meeting, so.
Yeah, I would be okay with that, except I don't know if we're having guests yet.
Yeah, well,
so-
I guess we can, if the guests show up, then we can, I hadn't heard if the basketball team was gonna be joining us or not.
Right.
We had offered them to come. Let me check my email.
Do you, Dan, you'd rather start the meeting?
The plan is to continue the conversation after the council meeting.
We can do that, or we can start the council meeting late, and I just checked my email, they weren't able to join us tonight,
Oh,
the
okay.
basketball team. So we won't have any guests for the council meeting.
Yeah, I think we were hoping to get this done before our 7 o'clock meeting this evening, but we could just reconvene for the workshop after our meeting.
I think we have maybe 10, 15 minutes left
I
if
was
you
gonna
want,
ask, yeah, I mean.
if you want to just start the council meeting late.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Yeah,
If
I
it's just-
prefer, because it just,
It just, the flow is a little
yeah.
better.
I mean,
Yeah.
and then if we have other discussion items later, I mean, that we can return to it, but just to go
Yeah.
through this.
If we start going a little too long, we can cut ourselves
Okay.
off.
Dan, would you
Yeah.
prefer we?
Yeah,
vote on
well,
that?
yeah, I mean, no, I don't think we have to vote on it. I mean, it's clearly, I think more people like that idea. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of advertising the start of a meeting
Yeah,
and
I-
not starting on time. I mean,
understand.
I appreciate the inconvenience piece, but
We could just let people know tuning in that we're running a little bit over, and we'll start shortly, but I understand each option. I don't think it's,
Yeah.
If the majority want to keep
What-
going.
Matthew, Marty, what
that's-
do you want to keep going, or do
Keep
you
going
want?
and get it done, and then we'll do the meeting.
That's 3 votes.
I was gonna say the opposite, but. so,
Okay.
I favor starting meetings when they're scheduled, but.
Yeah, I think, let's just keep going, and then.
Okay.
And hopefully, if we get over 10 minutes beyond where we're supposed to start, then.
I'll try to be
We'll pause.
quick. So,
Okay.
a bunch of these upcoming items, as part of some of my research into the financials and the accounting of the town, I discovered that the town had bond proceeds in the amount of $1,574,000, almost $1,575,000 from the 2018 bond authorization that were remaining. And I had talked about it a little bit at the last meeting, got some insight and history from you guys, and did some more extensive research and found that to be the case. I've worked with legal and our requirements for bonds, and we unfortunately have not been doing what we should have done with bond proceeds. Those typically should be spent within 3 years of the bond issuance. And thankfully, one of the positive implications of the town not having higher investment accounts is that we have no obligation where the money wasn't invested at a higher rate than the prevailing interest rate of the bonds, which is a no-no in the eyes of the IRS in regards to tax-exempt bonds. And so thankfully, we weren't generating significant interest. So this amount of funds that I've presented is the amount that was left plus any interest that was accrued, which it was approximately $20,000 over the time, since the 3-year time when the monies would have been spent. Legal is fairly confident that we can spend those funds, and we can justify the fact that during that time we went through COVID and we had some challenges. And many of the items that I'm going to propose to be using those remaining bond funds for were actually in the bond to begin with. So the replacement fire engine, the replacement rescue pumper was identified in the bond, in the 2018 bond at almost $700,000. And so that was included, though we received the estimate from the chief of 1.3 million. And so that, if you skip down to the bond reallocation, this will cover some of the items. I'm proposing that we use 1.3 million of those remaining bond funds to fund the rescue pumper. Therefore, we can take out the estimates that I had for debt service associated with the rescue pumper and remove that. I had to work with legal to identify, based on the warrant approval from 2018 for that bond and the council authorization, what expenses would be eligible to be used for this debt service. And so transfer station roll-off containers, which was an item that we had deferred, that was actually in the bond to begin with, and those were never purchased. So we're including those. And there was also boiler upgrades to a waste oil furnace. And so I included in the budget for here $50,800, which to be used for transfer station roll-off containers and or electric/boiler upgrades. And so that the electric was in the budget. That was an item we deferred. And so we can, because we needed to find eligible expenses, I've incorporated that into the use of these bond proceeds.
Is that the phase 3 electrical work?
Yes, the
Yeah.
phase 3 for the
Oh, okay.
the thing where the compactor is. I
Yeah.
forget what they call that.
The hopper.
Hopper house. Yes. Yes. Good. And so this will also, given some misinformation recently about the transfer station that we'll talk about later in the council meeting, this will show the town's commitment to investing into the transfer station as an existing facility, despite some considerations that the town will need to make in the future about how it handles recycling specifically. And so we also incorporated the lab building, roof and electrical, which we had in there, as well as all the panel security upgrades. We took those out of the operating budget, and we had those under capital expenses. They're kind of short-term expenses, but they do have a long-term benefit, and so legal thought that was best to get those expenses in there so we can utilize them. Because the number one advice they have is to get rid of these bond funds,
Yeah.
to spend them.
Yeah.
And so I had to identify expenses.
A quick,
Yeah.
Capital expenses and capital maintenance, that's essentially the same thing, correct?
Kind of, but I had it in the capital maintenance line of the budget.
Right. I mean, we just have some new terms, I think,
Yes.
so I just want to make sure that,
Yeah, they're kind of one and the same, but
okay.
yeah, those were in the operating budget
Yeah.
for essentially capital
And
maintenance.
going forward, we're going to use that capital.
We'll use that line for smaller, more maintenance-related items and not capital improvements long-term.
Essentially, our maintenance to capital items to some extent.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
But they are bond eligible under the terms of the bond and the council authorization and the warrant, so.
Right, but in the direction we're moving in, there are things that we probably wouldn't bond in the future.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
So we don't have to reauthorize all this with
No.
the
'Cause we already
warrants,
have.
because we already.
No, it's
yeah.
great because it's already been authorized, and
Right.
so following this discussion today, I've told the fire chief to begin the RFP process on the fire truck, and I've advised facilities that some of these projects can kind of start. So it's a financial error that works in our favor
That doesn't happen.
in
very
this
often.
budget, so that doesn't happen often, but yes.
Well,
And then,
given the lead time for fire engines, the nice thing about that is we don't have to wait until the budget passes before we
Yeah.
put that.
And we can pay cash for it, and many of them are offering a discount
Yeah.
so
So
they'll
we-
give us an RFP and then they'll show.
We will not
provide us
have
with
a new
cash
bond question on our warrants this year as a
No.
result.
No,
We won't.
that's one of the
Yeah,
beauties
that's
of
good.
this
Yeah.
mistake.
And then the public works improvements, HVAC controls, stack replacement, overhead doors. Some of these were included in the operating budget and some were included in the actual capital budget.
Yep.
Public safety security upgrades and sign replacement. Again, some of them were included in the operating budget, some in the capital budget. Library security upgrades,
In the budget.
those were in the budget, yep. And then the New Begin basketball hoop, so actually, the library security upgrades and the New Begin basketball hoops replacement, if you see what I've totaled is, it actually shows us overspending the bond proceeds.
Right.
I've included the library security upgrades I've taken out of the budget, but the New Begin basketball hoops, I included those in the capital budget and put them in here as a buffer for if we have things come in under budget, or if we have things come over budget, then we can fund those in there.
Or split the difference, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, or
Use
split the
Yeah,
difference.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
If we have $3,000 left, we can use 3,000 towards the
Right.
basketball hoops
Okay.
instead of, just so I have those in there and outlined publicly so folks know. So none of this stuff you need to actually take any action on, other than the action to, when we adopt the budget, to essentially remove these from the budget.
Okay, so, sorry, just so I'm clear, the ones that are both here and it's still in our, general fund budget,
Yeah,
are the library security upgrades and the hoops?
no, the
Basketball?
library security upgrades I took out, the New Begin hoops I left
Just
in.
the
It's
hoops.
just a-
So it's showing us overspending. I'm guessing that some of these projects are gonna come in under budget. And especially the fire truck, if we're able to pay cash for it, we can get 5% off, which is what a lot of them are telling us. 5% of 1.3 million is a lot of money.
Okay, all right. Okay,
It's
that,
anticipation of those changes.
Sure.
Anticipation of saving. So if we come to you and everything is done, which I will properly account for everything in this going forward to ensure what those expenses are and what we've expended, if we have any money left, then I might have to bring forth some other projects that are eligible under the bond to utilize the rest of those funds,
So that by the end of the year, this account is zero.
hopefully, yeah.
okay.
So if you go, we kind of jumped ahead, if you go back to where we are on facilities and parks, I made all those removals of all those things that I talked about. We removed the Pennell capital maintenance, the public safety capital maintenance, the transfer station capital maintenance. This was a capital maintenance, that budget line got missed, the $8,000 capital maintenance line when we reorganized. So I put that in there, so that's for ongoing capital maintenance, just general.
TS is,
Transfer
Transfer
station.
station.
thank you.
Yeah, sorry,
Nope,
I was trying to make a condensed,
Yeah.
trying to fit the
Spreadsheet.
cell.
yeah.
Yep.
And then library, we subtracted that and moved it to bond reallocation. Then council and board, community services, we removed those budgets. Debt service, we removed the debt service payment for the rescue pumper. There was a correction of the 2017 bond payment. I remember I had said that I wasn't 100% confident in the bond payments, so I looked at all those to make sure that they were right. The CIP, we removed the lab building, the central station door, public works projects, and the public safety sign. And then under revenues, we already talked about the changes in the revenues that I'm making when we talked about revenues. And then we talked about the transfer, the update to the unassigned fund balance and the municipal revenue share. And we already talked about those. So that brings us to the end. So I'll just quickly say, with these proposed changes, reduced use of fund balance and reduced borrowing requirements, municipal expenditures are up about 11.2%, or approximately 1.3 million over the current year, with total municipal revenues up 21%, or approximately 1.3 million. So this yields an approximately 1.8%, or $111,800 net decrease in the need for property taxes to fund the municipal portion of the budget. However, based on Gray's current assessed valuation of approximately $1.33 billion, this translates to a decrease in the municipal portion of the property tax rate by 14 cents, which is a decrease of 2.9% over the current year. This budget also complies with the LD1 property tax limit and therefore does not require an override as years past. And then if you go to the net taxes to be raised summary, We've revised this a little bit to make it more clear. So we show the general fund proposed budget, capital improvements, the non-property tax revenues. We grouped all those together with the municipal revenue sharing. And so that, therefore, you can see the decrease in the need. So the town is essentially asking the property taxpayer to pay $111,800 less than they did last year to support municipal operations.
Yep.
That's based on the positive revenue figures. The superintendent had originally gave me an estimate of 9.2%. He showed us 9.4% today. So that reflects, he said it's under the 9.4 already before the meeting. They said they're working on that. So that's basically what a change to the school would do. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, this shows an estimated increase to the tax rate of 76 cents. And that shows a reduction in the tax rate of 14 cents for the municipal portion. I view this kind of as a correction to last year's budget, given that the inaccurate revenues. And so typically, I wouldn't recommend a mill rate reduction. I would consider more of a flat rate. But I think given the struggles of last year's budget, I think this will hopefully be very well received by the community.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's a good faith effort to understanding where we were in September when the community, I think, in a show of support to some extent, did pass the budget, to show that now that we have a town manager and now that we have some of the expertise we need on the financial end, that we are getting our house in order, and this is the benefit of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot more order to be made, but
There's a
this
lot
is,
more order to
at
be
least from a budget perspective, we're fairly confident in the order. And then it shows the school portion of the tax rate, which is a 73-cent increase. It doesn't actually equal the 9.2 based on the valuation, the spread of the new valuation. So it's a 7.97%. And then TIF and county are reflected, and the TIF is a moving number that as the TIF value grows, we can't really mess with that number. But so based on this, it's a 76-cent tax increase, or 4.99%, and that's with the school figures. Just to reiterate, we're showing a reduction in the municipal portion by 14 cents or 2.9%. Reduction, not increase.
Right.
So if the school comes in less than that, that number will change. And so the average impact on a home assessed at $350,000 is an annual cost of $264.87. Again, that's mostly attributed to the school increase, and that the municipal portion is trying to absorb some of the other increases.
Is that 76 cents, I don't have my old papers in front of me, more or less than your original estimates?
It's substantially less than the original
Okay.
estimates.
Yeah.
The original tax rate increase that, we
Oh,
were
it's in my
proposing a
book. It's
tax
in our
rate
book, sorry.
increase of 2.7% for the municipal side, which was 13 cents.
Yeah.
So we've kind of swung all the way in the other direction as I refine the revenues and refine the expenses.
Right, I knew
Um,
it was less for municipal.
but with-
estimates. I was talking more about the total.
The total, I didn't have I showed a school increase of 3%.
Yeah, it was
Oh, okay.
four something.
Yeah, 3%, so it was a 46-cent mill rate increase. So if
Okay.
the school gets down to 3%, we'll have a really minimal tax increase, but I'm not optimistic. that
Yeah,
that
it
will
sounded more like 6%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if he gets-
they were shooting for under 6.
Yeah, if he
you
gets
said.
to 6%, I don't have my calculator open at the moment, but, we'll be under the 4.99 that I'm forecasting right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I just had one quick question. In years past, we have budgeted for an overlay, and I see you're not doing that this year. I'm just
Yeah,
wondering
so-
what the rationale is around
One of the reasons we're not budgeting for an overlay is we were extremely conservative in our budgeted valuation growth. So essentially, when the assessor makes the tax commitment, anything over and above that $15 million, $15 million will go into the overlay. And so the overlay is kind of a figure that you don't necessarily need to budget for, if you anticipate potentially reductions in the valuation or if you're tighter on valuation. But the estimates that the assessor provided us of 15 million growth in valuation is conservative.
Okay.
The estimate she gave me was 15 to 20 million, and I took the low number. So there is a state law about how much you can put into the overlay. So when we get to the end of the budget process and the tax commitment and we have the final school budget, we'll try to get to as close to the estimated tax rate as possible while also complying with the state law regarding overlay. If we exceed that, then ultimately we'll have to lower the tax rate even lower than what we've projected.
And just, can you define the overlay for people, because I think people, that you've got the unassigned fund balance, and now you've got this overlay. How do these?
Yeah, so the overlay is basically an account to account for errors in the valuation calculations.
Just that part of the.
Yes, it can also be used, it's not 100% okay to use it, but it can also be used for abatements. So if somebody, we say someone's house is worth $350 and they appeal to the assessor and the Board of Assessment Review that they don't think it's worth that much and ends up getting overrided, then that reduces the taxable valuation of that house. So that's kind of a place we can cover some of those valuation changes. But it's a place to manage the flow of the tax rate.
Okay.
Unless you can better explain it.
It feels, I don't know if this is accurate, it feels like the unassigned fund balance for the evaluation.
Well, so if we don't spend any of that money, which typically we don't,
Yeah.
it goes into unassigned fund balance.
Right.
And so essentially, if you look at the valuation for fiscal year '24, the valuation is the 1.313 million plus that overlay, whatever the value is associated with that overlay, and then it shifts over, and that's included in the current valuation. That 148 is already included in the valuation. That's why you take it out of the tax rate calculation. And then whatever the new overlay is, if we were really tight on valuation, then I'd probably recommend us covering an overlay, but because
Okay.
we feel that we're conservative on that front, we have some room to move in there.
Okay, yeah, if anything, our valuations are usually more than we anticipate.
Yeah,
Late-
like one year-
Lately, anyway.
One year in
So-
Lewiston, their valuation grew substantially based on the budget they put together, and they lowered the tax rate by like $1 because of all the development associated with CMP and the power corridor. And so, we want to try to manage that. We don't necessarily want to have something like that happen. So we do our best guess to forecast it through the budget process, to forecast that valuation growth.
Okay.
Two quick
Any-
things.
Sure, yeah, let's.
One of them is, in the past, we've always thought that we were funding the rec department through the fees, thank you, for the fees from the rec department. And it turns out that we're actually subsidizing about 25% of the cost of the rec department. Personally, I think this is maybe a conversation for the future, but I think that's something that we should revisit before we get into the next budget cycle. Because clearly that hasn't been the case, that rec has been paying for itself. And is that something that is okay, that we should continue? Or do we need to increase rec fees, or what's that about? I think that's something I'd like to put on our docket to talk about in the future. And then the senior moment I'm having for the second question is gone, so we can move on.
Okay,
Yeah, once we get more accurate figures for recreation, because we don't have those 100% accurate, and that's basically what reflects in some of the expenditure growth and the revenue growth. So it's not that we're spending $1.3 million more than we did last year. We're just better reflecting that. Really, we're only spending about $500,000 more than we did in previous year. And I think we're right-sizing the organization in that way.
Yeah, that's good. And the question I was gonna ask you, people are gonna ask, this is great news about our budget this year, but we are adding some new positions, so what's likely to happen to the tax rate in the future with those new positions is a question I
Yeah.
know I've got.
yeah,
Well, the one good thing is, I talked about at the beginning, outside of the budget, we have about $250,000 of one-time expenses in the budget. And if we also are able to pay off that Pennell bond that we have, a $233,000, so we're gonna have about a $500,000 buffer in the next budget to absorb any ongoing increases. And 2 of the essential 3 positions that we budgeted for are funded through TIF.
Right.
So the other 3 are funded through economic development, which is essentially funded through, well, the two are funded through economic development through the TIF, and then the other three will be funded in the budget. And I think they're appropriate positions that probably should have been here in years past.
And we may not be in the pickle we were in if we had them to begin with.
Yeah.
I think I think that it's good news, but I think that's an important message for people to hear, because through the efficiencies of the changes that we're making, through a better understanding of what we have in the budget, we're utilizing the money and the resources that we have as opposed to increasing them. I also think it never occurred to us or to anybody that I know of before to use the TIF money, especially for helping to plan some of these big projects. And I think that that's a good way to spend that money myself. So appreciate that.
And know that I'm thinking about next year's budget already. So when we go through this, that budget and future budget, so. But that's, in a nutshell, everything I needed to present. So that would complete our budget review. So procedurally, I don't know if you guys want to make a referral to refer the budget to the council for consideration at the April 9th meeting, and we will draft up budget warrants that reflect all the changes that we have talked about.
Well, we are running over, so I want to leave space for comments, but, I mean, I feel comfortable with this budget. I think it makes a lot of sense, and the way you're utilizing TIF monies to cover a lot of new positions that are needed, and also the fact that you've been better estimating our revenues. I think that they all account for the changes we've seen. I don't know if others have final thoughts they want to discuss. Do we want to reconvene workshop space at the end of our meeting to kind of have final thoughts, or?
I don't feel the need to myself.
Okay, all right. I think I might like to, I think we're all comfortable moving forward on the 9th with voting, but we should probably leave some discussion space in the agenda just to have final thoughts in case something comes up between now and then that we need to discuss or address before.
On the 9th?
On the 9th,
Yeah, so
before we vote.
We'll have a public hearing.
Yeah.
And before you vote, for any action you guys take, you can make discussion. If you
Yeah.
guys want to make changes to the budget that night based on public feedback or things of that nature, we can do that. I'll be prepared for that.
Okay.
And we can make those changes. If not, we're not, if we don't want to vote on it on April 9th, we can defer to a future meeting. We'll still be in compliance with what we need to approve for the warrant, so we have some of that time. If we want to kind of wait to see what the school budget does and where that ends up, we can. Depending on where that ends up, we could decide to, if the council wanted to utilize more fund balance or things like that to offset the tax rate, those are things that they could do. So we could have the public hearing on the 9th, consider the budget. If you guys want to wait until the school budget's passed, then we can wait to a future meeting. We can table the actual vote on the warrants until a future meeting, or we could do it on the 9th. That's completely
Yeah,
up to
I mean,
you.
they were having their vote on the warrants for the school budget on the 24th. But then the actual town meeting for the school budget wasn't until May 16th. I don't know, we can't really wait till May 16th.
No.
But I might want to table our voting on the warrants until our meeting on the 26th.
Yeah, we can
Because
wait for
we
that.
really got into a pickle last year where we locked ourselves into a budget, and then we found some things we wanted to amend after that, so.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with
I don't
that
know
if you guys
If
are.
others are okay with that, I think that would be the route I would be most
Yep.
comfortable.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
sounds good.
okay. All right, well, we definitely ran over here, so apologies to people watching and also attending. So we will adjourn our workshop at 7:21, and then we are just gonna take a quick 5-minute break before starting our meeting. So we will see everyone back at 7:26 for our formal council meeting which was originally scheduled at 7 o'clock. Thank you.